Earth is home to many creatures. Some may even consider a few of them monsters. But what of those more elusive and hidden creatures? The ones we just can't seem to find. Welcome to Monday Morning Monsters. Cryptozoologist and paranormal researcher Barnaby Jones talks about the unknown, mythical, undiscovered, and unidentified creatures from around the world, and the people who have seen them, look for them, and research them. Hear from witnesses about their encounters, as well as renowned names in the field about their work and research. Barnaby is the founder and lead investigator for Cryptids, Anomalies, and the Paranormal Society, based in Wisconsin. CAPS travels across Wisconsin and beyond looking for connections between different phenomena and how they can all be connected. Now, your host of Monday Morning Monsters, Barnaby Jones.
Good morning, monsters. We have a great show for you today. So Todd is off, so I'm running things. So hopefully this is runs smoothly as usual. But we have a great show, a great guest. Joshua Cutchin is with me today. And so looking forward to that. I want to start off first here and let you know what's been going on with CAPS recently. We just had that huge Halloween special last week, and I wanted to get right into it. So we had just this week, last night actually, our brand new episode of Bigfooting with the Turtle Man aired on our YouTube channel. So that is out, Bigfooting in Kentucky with the Turtle Man. If you haven't seen it, go over to youtube.com and then search Wisconsin Caps. Make sure to like and subscribe to our page and check out our newest episode with the Turtle Man. The next place you guys can find us is going to be in Lexington, Kentucky at CryptidCon. We are going to be down there November 19th and 20th. And that is Lexington, Kentucky. We are officially a sponsor of this year's event, so you guys can come out and check that out. It's going to be a great event with a lot of great speakers and stuff down there in Kentucky. And then we're off for a while doing some research and investigating over the winter. And then our next event is going to be in March, the Frogman Festival. See, I actually have it up on the screen this time instead of the little card over there that I had. So, so if you guys are anywhere in Ohio for the first ever Frogman Festival, we are going to be there. All right, guys. I also last week forgot to mention the other huge news for CAPS. We have a huge announcement. If you watched our Halloween live stream, you got a chance to see it. So I want to present it to you without any further ado, the latest stuff from CAPS. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Yowie, Grassman, Skunk Ape, Yahoo, Wild Man, Hairy Man. No matter what you call it, stories of large, upright ape creatures have been reported throughout recorded and oral histories around the world. Here in the United States, though, when you think of these creatures, you probably think of the Pacific Northwest, Washington, Oregon, Northern California, and you would be right. But did you know that Bigfoot has been reported in every state except Hawaii? It's true. Don't worry, we'll be covering all sorts of hairy, scaly, and feathered creatures on this show. But this season, we're going to start out with the ones that are right here in our team's backyard. We're going to focus on Bigfoot in Wisconsin. We're going to travel from the bottom of the state, where a woman had a gourd thrown at her from her own garden, and north to a man who saw one cross the road in front of his vehicle. Making our way even further up to a series of howls recorded in the night and a trail of frozen footprints in the snow. Hunters, barkeeps, farmers, and auto mechanics all had run-ins with the big guy. So come along and follow the evidence on the trail of the undiscovered beasts. All right, guys, we are super excited about this. On the Trail of the Undiscovered Beasts is going to start January on Paraflix, exclusively on Paraflix. It is a streaming platform service that is very much like Netflix or your other big streaming platforms. So Paraflix, go out and check that out. And if you use the code CAPS10, you get 10% off your first 3 months there, and it's only like $3.99 a month to subscribe to Paraflix. So we are going to start this brand new series exclusively on Paraflix starting in January. So hopefully you guys come out and check it out. We're going to be covering all kinds of cool cryptids and stuff on that show. The first season, as it says, is just about Bigfoot in Wisconsin, because we have a lot of stuff that we weren't able to cover and share on our regular show. And so we got a lot of stuff that we're going to put over there so that you haven't seen. So hopefully you guys can check that out. All right, guys. Now, with all that stuff out of the way, I want to get right into our guest today. He is an author, he's a researcher, and a musician, I see. So let's bring on Joshua Cutchin. How you doing, Josh?
Doing well. How are you?
I am great. Oh man, I am so happy to have you on the show today. I know we had to reschedule for stuff that you had going on, so I'm glad that we finally got you in here.
Yeah, I finally got through the gauntlet of Oktoberfest. For those of you who aren't aware, I'm also a professional tuba player, so my busiest times of year are Mardi Gras and October. So I finally made it. I made it alive. I only got sick once. So
You say tuba.
yes.
Awesome. Well, how did you get into that?
I'm a big guy, and my band director needed tuba players. Like it really is that simple. I was drafted more or less, but I have the physiology for it, and I took a shine to it. So I mostly do, New Orleans style stuff, and polkas. Which, man, I am so glad to not be doing polkas for a while.
Well, see, you learn something new every day, man. I know a little bit about you already, but I did not know that. So that's cool, man. So you have a ton of books. Can you well, other than playing a tuba, before we get into the books, tell us a little bit about yourself for the people that may not know who you are.
Well, I was born in North Carolina. I went to school in the great state of Wisconsin for undergrad, and came down here to Georgia. And as you know, big cities have a certain gravity, so I sort of got pulled into the orbit of Atlanta, and that's where I remain today. And I've kind of, through a combination of hard work and attrition, have become sort of the first call jazz tuba player here in Atlanta. But before that, I was working a desk job at the University of Georgia, and I'd always had interest in these topics. I was a monster kid, right? 20th Century Fox monsters and werewolves and Frankenstein and stuff like that. Frankenstein's monster, for you pedantic folks out there. But I really had that interest rekindled in a big way when I was doing that commute, which was about an hour into Athens every day, an hour there and an hour back. So I started listening to paranormal podcasts and started getting some stuff stuck in my head. And my sister-in-law got me a gift certificate for a book, one of my birthdays. And I spent that on J. Robert Alley's Raincoast Sasquatch, because it was like, oh, I haven't had a Bigfoot book in a while. And I read in that book that some of the Alaskan tribes say that they're Bigfoot analogs. The Bequas is one of them. That if you are given food from them, you shouldn't eat it because you'll be trapped with the Bequas forever. And I said, that sounds an awful lot like Western European fairy folklore. Someone should write a book on that. And I kept on waiting for Nick Redfern to come in and write a book like that, but he didn't. So after a couple of months, I literally looked around an empty room and said, is it me? And I ended up writing my first book called A Trojan Feast, which is all about the exchange of food and drink in these encounters. And that was 2015, and I left my day job at University of Georgia the day it was published, I think. Not because I expected to make a living off this, but because I was just tired of the day job. So I focused on writing and playing and teaching, and that shifted over the years to now I'm just playing and writing, and it has become an occupation of sorts. So I have Trojan Feast from 2015, the Brimstone Deceit from 2016, which is all about various smells that are noticed in all sorts of different encounters. I know that with the latest James Fox documentary on the Varginha case, the UFO case, that's sort of become an interesting topic for people nowadays. So that's sort of a topic that nobody had covered in long book form. So I wrote the Brimstone Deceit on smells. Then Thieves in the Night in 2018, which is all about supernatural child abduction and changelings and how that intersects with modern UFO lore. And 2020's Where the Footprints End, volumes 1 and 2 with Timothy Renner. It's all about high strangeness and the Bigfoot phenomena. So the things that a lot of the flesh and blood folks kind of like to leave out. And my latest book from this year is Ecology of Souls, a new mythology of death and the paranormal.
Wow. Well, congratulations to you on being able to leave your day job, and it looks like you're doing pretty well for yourself.
It took a while. It's just now to the point where I'm like, oh, this is actually a viable career opportunity. So if I ducked out a couple of years ago, I wouldn't be able to say that. But I'm writing some scripts for some YouTube channels right now, and it kind of is starting to look like a real existence. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you keep busy. So you, for my opinion, I mean, like I got introduced to you from the Strange Familiars podcast.
Oh,
yeah. And so I started listening to that because I was interested in, obviously, Bigfoot and creatures and stuff like that. And I started digging into the Fae realm and that for one of the projects that we were working on. And I stumbled across that. And I just had Timothy on the show a couple months ago. And that was the same time I had you coming too, but that had to get rescheduled. But so I consider you one of the the top people for my research for Fae and stuff like that. So I'm really interested in hearing more about your Fae and Bigfoot stuff as well.
Well, I really appreciate that. The fairy stuff is definitely a rabbit hole that you can keep tumbling down, but it's always endlessly rewarding for me. And there are definitely people that I would point to that are more authoritative than me on it. But I was always fascinated by that food taboo that I alluded to when I wrote A Trojan Feast, and I sort of found my way. I can't remember exactly if it was before or after that, but I found my way to the work of Jacques Vallée, whose 1969 book Passport to Magonia did a great job of saying, hey, it looks like this stuff is objectively real on some level, but it also looks like it's been repackaged from a lot of this older folklore. And there was a time when I would sort of waffle about and say, well, maybe it's pretty close. Maybe it's close, but there's some outliers here and there. And now I'm at the point where I believe that anything you find in fairy folklore, you can find something analogous in the UFO stories that we have today, or vice versa. I mean, even down to things like implants, which are prefigured in some of this Western European fairy folklore about the fairy blasts, where if you angered the fairies, they would hit you with a blast of blustery wind and leave a blister on your skin that would have, some sort of bit of rock or a bit of porcelain or something underneath, which sounds very much like the alien implants. So that was a big deal for me, sort of really grasping those similarities, and it sort of allowed me a way to reappreciate UFOs because probably in college, I'd always had an interest in this stuff, and I'd read about it on and off, but I'd kind of written off the UFO question because I felt like if the extraterrestrial hypothesis were true, I was being asked to believe that we were being visited by like dozens of civilizations, right? Dozens of creatures and dozens of different styles of craft. And to me, that just sort of multiplied variables unnecessarily in the traditional sense that Occam's razor should be treated. Don't multiply variables unnecessarily, right? But once I discovered the fairy stuff, and then even more importantly, or equal importantly, I guess I should say, once I discovered the similarities to altered states of consciousness, it allowed me to say, hey, this seems to be something objective that maybe we're playing a role in creating as well. So in other words, we slip into these altered states, and that facilitates the arrival of something from somewhere else that we maybe graft our own cultural expectations onto it, which is, I guess, in hindsight, a very sort of Vallean approach to it.
So do you think that some of this stuff is like the tulpa or like we've created it?
Well, I hope that my opinion changes every 6 months because I really admire folks who are able to adapt and incorporate new data and stuff. But the line of thought that I've been on for a while is that I don't think it's purely created from us, but I do think we play a role in it. I think that so much of what we take for granted with perception is built upon expectation. I mean, have you ever been like sitting on a couch and your significant other gives you something to eat and you think it's going to be sweet, and he or she gives you like, ground beef, and like for a second your brain is like, oh, what's in my mouth? You're not prepared for it, and your perceptions have sort of colored the way that you might normally love to have some ground beef or something. So I think something similar to that, not necessarily the ground beef example, but something similar involving expectations and perceptions might be at play, where there's something objectively real, and it's a, for lack of a better term, non-human intelligence that we're interacting with. But we have all this baggage that comes with, these experiences. We've been conditioned by decades and decades of pop culture to expect certain things. I mean, here's a good example. If you look at the common trope of electronics malfunctioning in the presence of a UFO, the earliest instances of that actually arise from the old pulp magazines. You can find some of those around the turn of the century, where there were allusions to, men from Mars shutting off Earth's power, and, the proximity of flying saucers shutting things off before flying saucers were, named out, obviously. But if you look at the modern day stuff, there are very credible people who say, yeah, my engine shut off when the UFO was around. So I don't think that they're making that up, but I kind of wonder if somehow the phenomenon isn't saying, oh, this is what you expect from us, so this is what we're going to give you. And time and again, you can find these sort of tropes that originate in pop culture and slowly make their way into the mainstream. I mean, I know some folks who would argue that the image of the gray alien is very much along the same lines.
That's interesting. When you think of the electronic phenomenon and stuff, as far as, manipulating our devices, and that, the combustion engine isn't an electric, you have the spark plugs, but it's not an electric thing. So how is this entity or whatever able to turn off your vehicle's engine?
Right. And the question that's asked, I mean, I think that there should be a longitudinal approach to this in book form at some point, and maybe it's in my future. But like, the question that I've always wondered is, why don't airplanes' engines shut off whenever they see UFOs? And apparently there's some redundancies built into airplane engines. But I think, keeping with this idea of this phenomenon that keeps on recontextualizing itself, that's the word I like to use. It keeps on changing to adapt with the times. If you look back to, before the UFO era, if you look back to ghost stories, like, what was one of the signs that a ghost was around? Oh, the candles would blow out. So it's almost as if this sign of the other being near us hasn't been grafted onto this modern electronic age that we live in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the lights going out, the candles going out. Yeah, you have the very similar stuff there. And to your point with the airplanes, who's to say that, the engines don't go out? Because, I mean, everyone that sees a UFO, their car doesn't die. And you have all these UFOs, all these airplanes that go missing. Look at the Bermuda Triangle, and, just for that sake, maybe you're onto something there. Maybe these airplane engines are failing.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be likely in some cases. I mean, one of my favorite stories is the story of Frederick Valentich, who his last transmission was seeing something strange in the sky over the Bass Strait near Australia, and that was the last anybody ever heard of him or his plane. So, who knows what happened there.
One of the stories that I always share when I get interviewed and stuff is, like our team, Cryptids, Anomalies, and the Paranormal Society. We got founded because we have different areas of study. So cryptids, anomalies, paranormal, and each one of us on the team focuses on a different area, so that when we investigate Bigfoot or UFOs or paranormal, we can bring those aspects all together under the same umbrella and look at it from a broader point.
I love that.
Thank you. And to that end, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but obviously you should be one of the people that would know this story if anybody does. There's the woman in white story. And I thought it was you that was talking about this on a different show, that there's the story of this woman in white that travels with the big hairy man and these candela balls of light.
Yeah, this is actually Timothy's thing, and it was one of those things, man. When he came to me with this, I'm like, Tim, you're barking up the wrong tree. Because he comes to me one day and he's like, did you know that women in white are associated with Bigfoot? I'm like, what are you talking about? But as soon as you start peeling back the layers on that onion, you can't unsee it, and it traces its way all through like popular culture. Like think of King Kong holding Fay Ray in her white dress, but there's a long-standing association of wild men with women in white. I mean, in some orchards in some parts of England, the oldest tree in the orchard was supposedly the spirit of the apple tree man, who was like this sort of wild man figure, and he tended to the apples, and he was accompanied by an elderly lady figure who was draped in white. So there's just a ton of examples of this time and time again that you see, and it, believe it or not, actually appears in some contemporary Bigfoot stories. But I believe what you're referring to is Frau Perkta, who was sort of perhaps a Teutonic moon goddess. I think it's a little bit unclear as to exactly how she originated, but you'll hear her called Perkta, Bertha, things like that. And she was this sort of pagan deity who was dressed in white, and her followers were the Perkton. And even if you've never heard of the Perkton, you probably have seen a depiction of the Perkton. If you've ever seen these, these processions of the Krampus through the streets of, Eastern Europe, people dressed up like Krampus, those are very closely related to, not a one-to-one match, but they're very closely related to the Perkton, which were these hairy wildmen figures. Now, the other things that seemed to follow Perkta around were also called the Heimchen. Which, Heimchen is actually German for cricket, I believe. But the Heimchen were sometimes described as small orbs of light, and these were the souls of children. And you find that, again, something that's a very common idea that was sort of put in place by the Catholic Church, but was borrowed from a lot of Western European ideas that, the unbaptized souls of children would linger in the form of corpse lights or ghost lights around certain places. So that brings in this woman in white thing, which, again, I thought Tim was really barking up the wrong tree with that. It floored me when he provided all this evidence. But you also have this association with these anomalous balls of light, which doesn't, it's being discussed now more than it ever has been, right, in regards to Bigfoot. Like it's actually, people are openly talking about it. But for the longest time was something that they didn't really want to acknowledge, that people would go to some of these sites where there's a lot of Bigfoot activity, and they wouldn't see Bigfoot, but they would see these strange orbs of light. Some people say, oh, it's eye shine or eye glow or something along those lines, but there seems to be a connection there. I mean, in some of the most dramatic accounts, Stan Gordon recorded an account of Bigfoot actually carrying an orb of light. I love those stories because they're so goofy, but I don't know what it means. It doesn't mean that they're definitely connected. Like at the end of the day, I want Bigfoot to be a large hairy hominid. Like I want to capture it and bag it and tag it so that I can be vindicated for decades of believing in this thing. But I'm afraid, and I suspect that won't be the case, because I think that there's something genuinely strange beyond our comprehension going along here, and the balls of light are just something else. It's another pile of dirt on the pile.
Do you have any? One of the things that's been brought up in our research, and I just got reports of another lady down in Georgia, I think. Yeah, Georgia.
My neck of the woods.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Wait, what? I'm pretty sure this is down in Georgia. And she was up in her tree stand, and she sees this entity that's about like 3 to 4 feet tall, and it's one of the shimmer men. So she can't see it. It's just like this outline. And it disappeared and it reappeared behind her and was like moving around. And is that any kind of connection with these Fae creatures, or what have you heard about that kind of stuff?
Well, first of all, I hate that. Like that's of all the things I can see, like that's one of the things I most wouldn't want to see. Like if it's a Bigfoot or a little person, I can like wrap my head around it. But it depends. As much as I'm on board with high strangeness and Bigfoot stories, whenever people talk about Bigfoot cloaking, I kind of get my toes curl a little bit, But I've heard too many of these stories from people who are sober and seem very authentic about what they saw, and they'll say that it either, the most confronting stories are when they see the creature go into that mode or out of that mode, the fairies were often attributed powers of invisibility. Speaking to the shimmer specifically, I'm not entirely sure that you can draw that comparison. However, there were a lot of sort of mystics from Scotland, Great Britain, Ireland, etc., who said that the sort of spirit body of the fairy folk was based around light and was almost had sort of a misty quality. So if you turn your head and squint, that kind of sounds like that. The thing about some of these these shimmering entity things that I can't get out of my head is Robert Guffey's book Camellia. I don't know if you had a chance to read that, but Robert is a legitimate journalist, and he started chronicling this story of this kind of this burnout who just so happened to wind up with some top secret classified night vision tech, and it seems as if he believed that he was being stalked by the government, by some sort of figures in authority, and that he would see these shimmering figures in his room. And Robert's story is about him thinking that it was someone who's obviously had a psychotic break, but as he sort of hangs out with this individual and spends more time with them and sort of looks into it, he begins to realize that there's something to some of the stuff that he's seeing. And involved in that was these sort of shimmering cloak technologies, so I don't think that you can ever rule out sort of the military component, because it does seem like technologies like that are just around the corner. You see stuff every now and then where people are showing you fabrics and materials that have micro tiny cameras. That's not a technical term, micro tiny, but super tiny cameras on the other side to project that image back to the front side to make it look as if it's invisible. And if you see that stuff in public, you've got to wonder what is being done behind the scenes. That's almost always orders of magnitude more potent than what we're led to believe exists.
Mm-hmm. I got off topic on that. The same story, but so our research area up in Upper Michigan that we go, and then this lady that was down in Georgia, both of these areas have a very similar feature, and a couple other places that we've looked too. There's these earthen mounds, and when I say that, I mean if you took the size of a regular casket and covered it with dirt. So they're about 8 to 9 feet long. They're about 2 to 3 feet tall. Just these little mounds of earth. And I don't know. They could be naturally forming, but I was wondering, do you have any relation to any of the fairy lore or anything? Is there anything written about that in these lores?
Who boy? So how much longer do we have here? So some of these older translations of some of the fairy names are the people of the mounds or things like that, and it was almost always a reference to these older hill forts, but also these burial tumuli that you see. And if you sort of pull back your perspective and look around the world, you can start to see that areas where there are these mounds of earth, these tumuli, whether they contain burials or not, if they were made by human hands, especially ancient human hands, there seems to be a lot of high strangeness that happens around them. Obviously with the stuff that I talk about in Ecology of Souls, because this is actually an entire chapter in Ecology of Souls, but some of the stuff that I talk about in Ecology of Souls is that, fairies were very, very closely associated with the dead, to the extent that if you died, you might become one, or if you died, you might be seen in their company, or they might come and take you away to the other side or something along those lines. So that's probably where this association between these mounds and hills and fairies came from, because just folklorically speaking, a lot of people in Eurasia, well, actually throughout the world, but let's focus on Eurasia, associated mountains and hills with the place where the dead would dwell. So you take that and you transplant that to the New World, and you have all these mounds, which, I have a presentation where I show the Etowah mounds here in Georgia, pre-excavation, so they're still covered with trees. And I show a picture of a fairy fort in County Clare or whatever, and I ask people which is the fairy fort and which is the American mound, and no one can ever point out the difference. And that's because they're essentially the same thing. They're earthworks, oftentimes including burials, that sort of get avoided over time, and they have trees that grow atop them, and they basically are pretty much the same thing. So I say all that to say, yes, you don't find the you don't find the fairy mound association as strongly in the New World. amongst indigenous tribes. However, down here in Cherokee country, arguably the strongest association between fairies and mounds in the New World exists. So very strong association in the Old World. Elves and Huldafolk and fairies and gnomes, etc., all dwelled in earthworks. But here in America, you find that same belief amongst the Cherokee. They have several really interesting legends that sound straight out of Ireland and whatnot. One of my favorite ones actually took place in Franklin, North Carolina. There's a mound there that you can still visit today. Sadly, it's in like the middle of like an industrial park. It's not being treated as the site it deserves, but called Niquosi, which was one of their settlements. And there's a story that sometime in ancient history, the Cherokee were under siege by an invading tribe. And just as the Cherokee were about to be defeated, out of the mound poured the Nanehi, the Cherokee fairies, and they defeated the invading tribe. And that same legend played out again, supposedly, during the American Civil War, when the town of Franklin was poorly defended. Union soldiers scouted the town, said that they shouldn't go into town because there were guards on every corner. And according to the Cherokee who still live in the area, it was the Nanehi coming back out of the mound there to help defend the area. So here in the Southeast, you find tons of associations between fairies and earthworks. And, you know, I have to imagine, even though not as explicit, that sort of a belief that the mounds were sort of haunted areas would extend up into the upper Midwest as well in some form or fashion.
That's awesome. I was expecting just that. Well, I don't know, but that's really cool.
I mean, yeah, I would say definitely. I mean, even if you don't find that explicit fairy connection, you'll still find, you know, a lot of tribes that would avoid these areas. And
yeah,
you know, you can get into some dodgy territory where some people are like, oh, it was this, you know, race of people that came over here and built the mounds, and that's why they're so similar. And I sure as heck don't ascribe to that. I mean, it looks like this is some form of spirit technology that sort of arose independently on both sides of the Atlantic because it works, you know. But at the same time, you will find stories amongst certain tribes that if they don't ascribe them to their ancestors, a lot of them do, they will ascribe them to a race of supernatural beings that built a lot of these earthworks. You know, one of my favorite mound sites is there in Wisconsin that I need to revisit. I haven't revisited it since I've been into this stuff, but Aztlan is a fantastic mound site, which just so happens to be in, you know, Lake Mills, that has its own sea serpent legend in the lake there. Yeah.
We haven't released it yet, but we actually have an episode coming out of like Native American mounds and stuff like that as far as there. And we did a paranormal investigation at Aztlan and Cahokia Mounds in St. Louis.
Oh, that's so amazing. Yeah, you know, you got to be careful because like you kind of slip into that haunted Indian burial ground trope real easy, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that there's not something strange at these areas. And sort of where I've landed is that, you know, something about the building of these earthworks, at least in the imagination of people, which, as we discussed earlier, might be a powerful tool in and of itself, but also like the actual materials that are used might actually be able to draw in powers from beyond the veil to get all spooky.
Oh, man. All right, we have to take a quick break here for station identification and our sponsors, and we'll be right back with more Joshua Cutchin. If you have any questions for Joshua or myself, please leave them on your chosen platform of viewing, and we'll address them. Thanks, man. We'll be right back.
Certified psychic medium Stephanie Lynn creates an authentic connection between the living and the spirit world. Stephanie knows she is here to help heal, educate, and provide validation that there is more after death, and allows herself to be a conduit and work as a team with spirit to pass on messages from their world to ours. Stephanie Lynn also works as a spiritual life coach to help you achieve, create, and manifest your best self and life. Looking for help communicating with an animal? Searching for a past life regression therapist? Or dealing with a paranormal experience? Stephanie Lynn is here to help. For a list of full services, visit her on Facebook under Stephanie Lynn Spirit Sensitive. That's Stephanie Lynn Spirit Sensitive.
All right, guys, we're back here on Monday Morning Monsters. I'm your host, Barnaby, and today we're talking with author and researcher and tuba musician Joshua Cutchin. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great.
Good. Well, before the break, we were talking about these earthen mounds, and from our experience with CAPS, a lot of the areas that we research Bigfoot activity and strangeness have these weird mounds. And we have talked to some Native Americans who have said that they had some significance and stuff, but nothing really solid as far as that. So that's what we're talking about here. And you had some really interesting notes on that. Do you know of anyone that's ever like excavated one of the smaller, like we'd call them like the fairy mounds then? And have they found anything?
Well, it's really interesting. There are some, in the old world, there are some of these sites that were regarded as just hills that the fairies were around.
Okay.
And that's a very common thing that you see sometimes too. I mean, like, Schiehallion in Scotland is like a mountain, and it's just a fairy mountain. Like it's not a burial ground. But sometimes these mounds would actually yield human remains. I believe one example was called Pudding Pie Hill. I can't remember what part of England it was in, but it was a place where people claimed that they could hear the fairies in the soil. And as soon as the 19th century rolled around and people loved to to open up graves, as they did back then, they found human remains in there. And there's another great example from Wales of a person who claimed that they had encountered a giant in like this shimmering golden cloak, and either the giant gave this individual a golden chalice or a wizard did, right? But everybody thought that this guy's story was crazy until, lo and behold, they excavated the hill, the mound, and they found indeed a golden chalice as well, just as you described. As far as here in America, like, it really is such a tragedy because so many of these sites were literally looted for souvenirs. And there's so much damage that was done. I mean, it's still happening in Ireland to this day with the fairy forts and stuff, where they're just like bulldozed for construction, and they're moved to clear the way for farmland. I mean, I was just at Okmulgee literally yesterday, which is a mound site here in Georgia, and they put the railroad through the funeral mound. Like, so it's a real, like, you have to laugh because it's so egregiously insensitive.
Yeah.
But so many of these things did contain burials, and some of them had, it seems, I thought that they were sort of bunk at first too, but it seems that some of them did contain oversized skeletons. What that means, I don't know. But there are, not every story about giant skeletons coming out of the mounds is true, but there are, only one has to be true, right? You know what I mean? Only one of those stories has to be true. So there's that. And, so that's kind of that could be, depending on the way you look at it, like a Bigfoot connection in a way. And then, curiously enough, we can say this with a little bit more certainty, a handful, very, very small number, but a handful of these mounds have been excavated and have yielded effigy pipes. A lot of yielded effigy pipes, but a handful of yielded effigy pipes that look very much like monkeys. And the question is, where does an indigenous American in 600 AD in Louisiana get the image of a monkey? That shouldn't be something that they'd be designing or revering. So it's interesting.
Mm-hmm. on your note of the railroad cutting through there here in Wisconsin, I don't know if you're familiar. We have the Man Mound, and they
Mm-hmm.
literally drove the road right through the feet of it. And I don't know, that one bothers me a little bit, that you couldn't just go 30 feet out of the way. But
Yeah, and it's I kind of, if I place myself in that time and place, like I don't, obviously I don't condone it, but I kind of understand it, because a lot of times they were like, hey, were these, your ancestors, and some of the indigenous population, at least in some instances, were like, no. And so like, okay, well, nobody's around who would object. Let's go ahead and just go right through it. But, with the benefit of hindsight, it just really, it's an absolute tragedy.
so I have so many questions for you. Like, we could be here all day. But when you're talking about all these different things, the fairies, the Bigfoots, the other things, we're talking about the connections between all these, where you're talking about the abductions and stuff, and the alien abductions and that. Do you think that, these things are all the same thing and just repackaged under different names because of how people are interpreting them? Or do you think that these things are all separate? What have you come across?
Well, in some instances, yes, I do think it's the same phenomenon that's been repackaged and is somehow in this call and response with us as a civilization. Our expectations change, and then the phenomenon changes along with it. I think the Bigfoot thing is actually a pretty good example, because I can buy there being large hairy hominids of a flesh and blood variety, mundane, quote unquote, in the Pacific Northwest. But then when you look at them being in, people say 49 states except for Hawaii, but like there are stories of giants in Hawaii too. And then you look at them all throughout South America, and all throughout Australia, and all throughout, Eurasia. Arguably, the least amount of like Bigfoot stories come from Africa, where they actually have apes, right? I always found that interesting. But like the idea that every population would have something that so strongly resembles each other, to me suggests that we're not dealing with a flesh and blood creature, and that we're dealing with like some sort of idea or some sort of other thing that can pop in completely untethered to time and space as it chooses. As to whether or not these things are all one thing or not, I'm really fond of saying that if it's not a complete circle, these Venn diagrams overlap a ton. And that's a lot of what Ecology of Souls was people have drawn connections between near-death experiences and shamanic initiation, or near-death experiences and alien abduction, or shamanic initiation and alien abduction, and all these different contact modalities. But I think it deserves to be said that so many of these things have a lot of the same attributes. I mean, missing time happens across, literally everything: psychedelic trips, near-death experiences, the shamanic initiation stuff, alien abductions, obviously, fairy folklore, even some Bigfoot stories, which I was super surprised to find out. But they're not uncommon. They're not common, but they're not uncommon. Let's put it that way. They just don't get talked about that much. You have this peculiar buzzing sound that happens at the onset of a lot of these different contact experiences. You have these anomalous lights. I mean, we were talking about that earlier, but I would argue that the lights are the most common thread linking a lot of these things. And you see them across everything. So if we're not dealing with one big thing, and it's not all just one giant, if it's not many faces of the same thing, it's different things that use the same techniques to interact with us. I think that's where I personally have landed with a lot of this stuff.
Interesting. I wanted to give you a little bit of time here to talk about your new book. I know you got the volume 1 and 2 out. Can you tell like everybody what it's about and some of the stuff that they can find in it, and then where we can get one?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you. So, I alluded to Passport to Magonia earlier, and how Valet really showed that there was a lot of continuity from the older fairy folklore and just spirit belief in general, through to the UFO stuff. But I kind of wondered if there had been a Passport to Magonia that was written in 1300. What sort of sort of connections they would be drawing and what that would look like. And I imagine it would be saying, hey, look, the fairies look a lot like the dead. And, as I've said, like almost every culture has little people, and almost every culture finds some way to connect them to the dead. So if we use the transitive property, the dead to fairies and the fairies to, modern day quote unquote aliens, then it kind of implies that aliens might have something to do with the dead. So that sort of always stuck in the back of my head. But the other thing that always really stuck with me was this quote from Anne Strieber, who was Whitley Strieber's wife. And Whitley famously released Communion in 1987. And, your appraisal of Whitley might vary, but he definitely received a lot of correspondence from individuals who were sharing their own experiences after Communion came out. And Anne was sort of collecting a lot of these, and I get the sense that she was more or less acting as his secretary, reading his correspondence and replying because he just didn't have the time. And he recalled distinctly, and he's mentioned this time and time again over his books, that she had, collected a list of observations that she'd made over the course of reading this correspondence. And she wrote in there, this has something to do with what we call death. So that always stuck in my head. And, people, believe it or not, again, does not get talked about enough, but people will see dead friends, relatives, loved ones during their alien abduction experiences. So what do we do with that? It doesn't conform to the extraterrestrial hypothesis, this idea that we're being visited by little green scientists from another planet. But, when you put that up against, poltergeist infestations setting up in the homes of alien abductees, which is super common. When you put that up against the synchronicities that unfold in alien abductees' lives, when you put that up against the sort of spiritual reawakening that they have, at the very least, you've got to say, if these are extraterrestrials, they're freaking weird extraterrestrials. They're dabbling in things that we have yet to comprehend. So I wanted to unpack that just regarding the UFO phenomenon. And as I did so, I said, there are all these older beliefs that sort of need to be addressed too. And these are older things that we don't really talk about or think about that much in modern society. Ideas like polypsychism, the idea that you aren't just you with your own soul, your single soul, but that there are actually multiple souls, multiple aspects of you that reside within you. Ideas like the wandering soul, the idea that your soul can sort of separate and wander at will and communicate with other beings. We don't really talk about that much in mainstream society. So I needed to talk about that. And before I knew it, I had a ton of background information that had to be set up just so I could talk about the UFO thing. And in doing that, I soon discovered that so many aspects of the paranormal tie right back around to death time and time and time again. We were just talking about the mountains being burial sites. People have wondered for a long time about the significance of those. So, you end up having to talk about those. These shamanic initiations that you see oftentimes are literal, if not figurative, death and rebirth that allows a person to come back with extra powers. Obviously, the near-death experience is connected to death. The fairy stuff, obviously connected to death. But even ideas that we don't talk about that often either, like, the wild hunt, the spectral procession that would travel through the skies of Europe, was always very much believed to have some sort of association with the dead. And so then you talk about all that, and then you can talk about the UFO stuff. But even a lot of cryptids, have these connections to the dead. The thing that I never have really gotten the chance to write about lake monsters until this book, not in depth anyway. And one of the things that I found to be extremely poetic was the fact that lake monsters are either written off by skeptics as being logs, or depending on who you talk to, literally can transform into a log. Like, there are a lot of indigenous beliefs here in North America that actually say that the lake monster can appear as a log. And if you look at the log as a symbol, it has so much weight to it. Our first boats were probably literally logs, and then obviously we made dugout canoes out of those. But boats are a symbol of travel. They're a symbol of passage to the afterlife. And similarly, UFOs are a transportation obsessed phenomena, right? It's all about where do they come from, where are they going. And so it's this idea of the boat to the afterlife, the travel to the afterlife, the travel to another realm that we cannot reach. That seems to be cropping up time and time again. So it's just maybe maybe what I'm seeing is just unfolding on, a symbolic motivic level, but it's just so persistent that I felt like at the very least we need to collect them all in one place. So volume 1 is about those ancient traditions and monuments and fairies and all the older stuff, and then sort of volume 2 is the way that we're dealing with it in modern paranormal circles and talking about Bigfoot and UFOs and various cryptids, and how those seem to, again, always seem to have some sort of thread that you can take back to death, whatever death is, right?
That's interesting. As you were talking, I'm thinking, you're linking this death to aliens and stuff, and when people are on their deathbed, they always say like, "Well, I saw a white light" or something, and that's another thing that I was thinking has this connection with the alien abductions, the super white light, and I mean, have you thought of that, or has that it brought up?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
the lights, and a lot of times the way that the lights will be described is the exact same way. You'll have people in these near-death experiences saying it looked like it was 10,000 times brighter than the sun, but it didn't hurt my eyes. And then you'll turn around and read a UFO description that says the exact same thing. It was an odd light, it was super bright, but it didn't hurt my eyes. But it's interesting. There are some people who have lived these lives of constant contact with extraterrestrials, or what they believe are extraterrestrials, and sometimes there will be light phenomena that's observed by not only themselves, but also by others around the time of their death. And the people who are cognizant enough to see that before they die say, don't worry, it's the aliens coming for me. And it's a very unpopular thing to talk about for a lot of different reasons. People hold the idea that UFOs must be extraterrestrials very near and dear to their hearts, and then on top of that, no one likes to talk about death. But there's something there, and I don't know if I got it right, but at least at least I collected it all in one place. So yeah, you're absolutely, yeah. And so that little connection that you made, that light bulb moment, pardon the pun, that you just had, that light bulb moment that you had, like, the more you just sit with this idea and think about it, the more you can find more and more and more connections, which is why this dang book that I wanted to be one small book turned out to be like, I think, a third the length of the Bible. Like, I'm not, yeah, it just turned out to be this all-encompassing thing, but like, I felt like it had to be said. So I'm glad it's out there. I'd never want to write something that long again, that's for sure.
Well, I am excited. I'm going to have to get myself a copy of volume 1 and 2 of that. I know they're on Amazon. Can people get like autographed copies directly from your site, or?
Absolutely. So let me clarify something real quick.
Sure.
It's technically a 2-volume book, volume 1 and volume 2. You get volume 1 and volume 2, you got it. But because it's so long, I had to put all the endnotes and appendices into a third book, which is called the Ecology of Souls Companion. However, if you buy volume 1 and volume 2, there is a URL in there that links you directly to my website. You can just go to my website and you can download the companion for free. Because if you buy the book, you should be able to get the references for free, right? But if you're a print aficionado like I am, like, I love to have physical media, so you can also buy the companion if you want to. But volumes 1 and 2 are combined into one book for the Kindle version, and that's also available on Amazon. However, as you alluded to, you can get copies directly through me if you just visit my website. There's a contact form, and I, unlike Amazon, offer a discount for buying both of them together. So you can save about, I think, like $10 to $15 by going through me, as opposed to buying through Amazon. And then if you get through all three, there's even bigger discount. So, but yeah, an autograph for me and all that mess. Yeah.
Awesome. And where can people go to find you?
That is joshuacutchin.com. JOSHUACUTCHIN. Just like a cut on your chin.com. I've said that a couple of times. I don't know if you can tell.
Good.
Restaurants, you take restaurant reservations and they're like, who, Hutchinson? And it's like, no, just cut chin. One cut, one chin cut.
Awesome. Yeah, I have a very big problem trying to spell stuff if it's not in front of me or if I'm not writing it out. So yeah, it's good that you practice. All right. Well, we are almost out of time here for this episode. If anybody has any comments or questions, feel free to leave them and we'll get them in right here at the end of the show then. I have one last question for you. I want to see if you can touch on any of this. And I know this is a huge topic, so as whatever you can do for me. But we're working on recently. This got brought up to us is the Goat Man or the satyrs and stuff like that. Do you looking back into this stuff? You have the Greek mythology and then the Fae creatures and stuff like that. Is there any like my specific question is, do you know what happened to these creatures? Like were they killed off supposedly, or is there any Native American lore of these creatures? Like, where did they end up going? Any kind of stuff like that?
Well, there's that famous supposed Greek legend that the god Pan was one of the few gods who actually died. So maybe they all did die. But if you adopt a stance that this phenomenon again evolves as we evolve our thinking, you can see a pretty clear chain of custody from that older, those older fawns and satyrs into arguably Bigfoot. And this is something it's not even my idea or a cryptozoologist's idea. It's something that a lot of mythologists have talked about. The fact that you had these bipedal hairy creatures who were the masters of the woods, who slowly transformed into the wild man archetype. And arguably Bigfoot is in line with the wild man archetype. At the same time, anything that wasn't Christian in Western Europe was demonized. So it was like, oh no, those aren't fairies. You're actually consorting with the devil, and that's where we get the idea of the devil having all these goat-like features and the cloven hooves and whatnot. So there's also sort of a little window there where you talk about Bigfoot as being like mountain devils. You hear that all the time, and that might be related to that. Of course, again, there's some older indigenous stuff here in North America that exists before Christianity got over here that it seems like they were still calling them devils at the time too, as well, though. So I kind of would argue that you can sort of draw a line from those fawns and satyrs all the way through to Bigfoot, And again, a lot of these fairy folk, when they weren't like little people in vests and stuff, were often described as being short and covered in hair and simian, like a monkey. So, you just find these things that are really specific and you just don't know what to do with them. But that would be what I would say, is that it seems to, that idea seems to have evolved and changed as our own disbelief in fairies has ascended.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
There's so much stuff. I mean, like, we could talk all day. I feel like I have so many questions for you.
Well, this has been real fun, though. This has been real fun.
Oh, thank you. I try and I listen to a lot of our guests, when I bring you guys on and stuff, I try and, know what you guys have talked about and stuff. And I try and go a completely different direction if you haven't, noticed. But the best part about hosting the show, and, I have another podcast as well, is I get to poke the brain of the person that I want to talk to for my own selfish means. So that's always fun too.
That's absolutely what it is. I mean, like, a big part of why I got involved in this is because I was screaming at my car radio because I wanted to have conversations with some of these folks. And, here I am 7 years later, and I consider some of them my closest friends. It's been a real trip, that's for sure.
Awesome. Well, I totally appreciate your time. The whole thing with this, the evolution of the goat man and stuff that we were just talking about, I think the biggest thing for me that people don't realize is when people come up to me at shows and stuff, and they say, well, there's only one Bigfoot. Where is he now? Wasn't he up in the Pacific Northwest and now he's over here? Like, you're telling me, he moved to Wisconsin. No, I'm telling you, there's another whole family over in Wisconsin,
Yeah. Of all the ideas that, I can agree on with the flesh and blood folks, it's definitely the idea that there is not one Bigfoot.
Yeah. But, on that same avenue is people don't realize that when you take the names away from these things, like you were just talking about the goat man and those creatures, the fawns and Pan and satyrs, when you take the name away and you look at what people are describing, you see these same entities or these same descriptions all over the world on all these creatures.
100%. I mean, those are restrictions that we as human beings have put on these phenomena, and the idea that it would somehow be accurate because it comes from us is an absolute fallacy.
That's perfect. That brings us right back to the beginning of our conversation today. You were talking about how, you love to change your beliefs and how they're constantly changing. Like I was going to make a note over here that, you have religion versus science. Religion is the belief and the understanding that this is the way it is. And science is constantly evolving and changing based on the new information that we have. And when you're a researcher and when you talk to new people, I've learned so much weird stuff about death and stuff from you today and these mounds, and that it's opened my mind more to these different avenues that you can go down. And that's what's important about being a true researcher and taking the scientific approach to this stuff.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And if you do it right, I think that these pathways lead you to ever richer territory. I mean, I think it was a famous French ufologist, Ami Michel, who said that UFOs are the one subject where you start off studying strange things in the sky, and before you know it, you're studying Arab mystics. It's like it just leads you into these strange places that seem like they're connected. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I always tell people when I started out researching Bigfoot, I took a very zoological aspect. I started researching, gorillas, orangutans, the greater apes, and going down that train of thought, I can now explain a basic understanding of string theory.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's and you know what? Sometimes in my more introspective moments, I wonder if that's not the point behind this stuff, is to push us to become better rounded individuals.
Absolutely. I can't thank you enough for coming on. I could talk to you forever. Where can people find you? Where can we get more information, get a hold of you and stuff?
JoshuaCutchin.com, JoshuaCutchin.com. And I will be giving a talk 2 weeks from today, Monday, November 21st, 2022, 7 to 8:30 p.m. through the Morbid Anatomy Museum. It's a talk on one of the chapters from Ecology of Souls. It's called Soulcraft, Understanding the UFO as a Death Symbol. And tickets are available at morbidanatomy.org, MORBID ANATOMY. And it's an online presentation, and it should be a good talk. A little discussion afterwards as well.
Awesome. I work in the evenings. Otherwise, I would definitely check it out. But definitely anybody that's interested. I've heard you on a lot of other podcasts and shows and stuff. You're wealth of knowledge, man. And I hope everyone gets to come and check that out as well. So,
well, this has been a lot of fun, Barnaby. Appreciate it, buddy.
Thank you very much, man. All right, guys. Thanks for watching this week's show. Until next time, I'm Barnaby Jones, Joshua Cutchins. We'll see you out there.
The truth is here and now on WLTK-DB Talk Radio at WLTK-DB.com.